These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program.
Take
They
corporate
are
CEOs.
HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body. Point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Well, America's fourth turning has arrived. I'm going to dig into that in a moment. And we're still in, I think, really significant danger from Donald Trump, his extremist followers, and the right-wing billionaires who fund him. Professor Richard Wolff will be with us in the second hour of our program today. And I'm going to dig into, also in the second hour of our program, why the numbers from the UK don't apply to the United States. There's a really interesting twist to this whole story that is not being shared in the media. We'll get into that in the third hour. In the second hour, in our third hour, Dr. Jason Box is going to drop by, the climate scientist who has been reporting from the Arctic. He's been in a couple of the documentaries that Leonardo DiCaprio and I have put together. And he's got some tough talks, some pretty startling information he'll be sharing with us. But I wanted to start with America's fourth turning. This is some years ago. In fact, I think it was in 1997, as I recall. William Howe, who has now passed away, and Neil Strauss wrote a brilliant book. It was called The Fourth Turning. And what they pointed out was that roughly every 4 generations, every 80 years, America kind of goes through a reboot. And, you know, the first one was in 1776, and we became America. We rebooted away from the oligarchs who ran the British Empire. 80 years after that, in 1861, with the Civil War, roughly 80 years, 4 generations after that, The oligarchs of the South rose up and tried to turn America from a democracy into an oligarchy. We fought them back and we rebooted again. 80 years after that, the oligarchs rose up with the so-called businessman's coup, where they actually tried to recruit a Marine general, Smedley Butler, to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt. They had 500,000 men, that they were ready to march on the White House and capture, kill, kidnap. We still don't know the details because FDR put a stop to the congressional investigations after 2 weeks. But apparently to take down Roosevelt, he stopped that, and he spoke about them at some length afterwards. Calling them out. In fact, he said, for out of this, this was in 1936 in Philadelphia, he said, for out of this modern civilization, economic royalists carved new dynasties. New kingdoms were built upon concentration of control over material things. It was natural and perhaps human that the privileged princes of these new economic dynasties thirsting for power reached out for control of government itself. Well, he beat them. He defeated them. And here we are again. We thought that the crisis of climate change, which literally has our country on fire right now, and the crisis of the collapse of the middle class, even though the latest economic numbers, they were just released today, suggest that the economy is back to where it was 2 years ago, or basically 2 years ago, before the pandemic. But still, the middle class is in crisis. We still have fewer than half of Americans even in the middle class for the first time since the 1940s. And this is the result of 40 years of Reaganomics. And so we thought, we Democrats, we Americans, we thought that the Democrats had a fix for this, for both these problems, for the climate change problem and for the economy problem. And this was this $3.5 trillion infrastructure legislation that the Democrats are proposing to pass through reconciliation, in addition to the roughly $1 trillion. It's actually only $500 billion of new money. A lot of it now is repurposing money from the stimulus that was passed just a few months ago. But taking this $1 trillion of new money and putting that into hard infrastructure, that's the bill that the so-called problem solvers have worked out, or at least say they've worked out. I mean, the devil's in the details. We don't have a final bill yet. So my position is that thing was never going to pass. It's not going to pass now. This is just the only reason that the Republicans and people like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are going along with this right now is to try to cause Americans to think that the much larger $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, which also includes things like rebuilding our schools and getting people back to work and just human infrastructure as well as our physical infrastructure, they're trying to take down both of them. I mean, Donald Trump is out there saying just that little tiny, $550 billion, $1 trillion, whichever you want to call it, bill that Sinema and Manchin said, yeah, we can do this. That's a joke. And Trump's saying, that should not be passed. So I'm telling you, the Republicans and the billionaires who own them are going to do everything they can to beat this back, to fight this. And this is a time of crisis for America. And I really believe that we are now on the verge of this fourth turning. Every 80 years, we hit an economic crash, which is always brought about by billionaire overreach, whether it was the billionaires of that day. Obviously, it wasn't billions, but, in inflation-adjusted dollars. The East India Company oligarchs that we fought, that the Boston Tea Party targeted and that we fought the Revolutionary War against, whether it was the Southern oligarchs, the slave owners, who we fought a civil war against, whether it was the oligarchs who FDR put in a box. And by the way, he really did put them in a box. He started enforcing the antitrust laws and he raised the top tax rate to 91%. Or whether it's the oligarchs today. In every single case, the economy gets crashed by these greedy people, these greedy, essentially sociopaths or psychopaths. And as a consequence of that crash, this is the crash happens because they are trying to acquire as much political power and as much wealth as they possibly can. And when FDR, he said, these economic royalists complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain about is that we seek to take away their power. And then he added, as the crowd just went nuts, and our allegiance to American institutions requires the overthrow of this kind of power. And then he went on. I mean, this was 80 years ago. He died 76 years ago this year. He said, in vain, they seek to hide behind the flag and the Constitution. In their blindness, they forget what the flag and the Constitution stand for. Now, as always, they stand for democracy, not tyranny, for freedom, not subjection, and against a dictatorship by mob rule and the overprivileged alike. 80 years, here we are, back again, confronting these billionaire oligarchs. Back during the Dust Bowl, it was such a challenge. And now, Sinema comes out and says, as I said, the Democrats thought that they had this $3.5 trillion deal. They thought all 50 of the Democrats in the Senate were on board. Yesterday afternoon, Kyrsten Sinema announced that she does not support this $3.5 trillion bill. This includes climate change initiatives. It includes expanding Medicare. It expands disability leave. It expands family leave. It expands elder care. It makes education at both pre-K and community college levels more affordable. All of these things. And Kyrsten Sinema just came out and said, nah, I'm not going to do that. Now, my personal opinion is either she's getting big money from the Koch network and the other right-wing billionaires out there, or she's figuring when the voters kick her out in 2024, which looks pretty inevitable. She is 24 points underwater overall in Arizona among all voters, and among Democratic voters. She's really, to quote, let's see who wrote this, Carrie Elevald over at Daily Kos, she's really sucking wind. She has a 23% approval rating among Democrats in Arizona right now. Compare that with Mark Kelly, her colleague, who has an 89% approval rating among Democrats in Arizona. But, maybe she's going to try and pull a Paul Ryan, get a multi-million-dollar job and he moved $7 million out of his campaign account into his little personal PAC or his foundation or outlet or whatever it was, outfit. And, she's going to do one or the other, right? She's going to be rich for the rest of her life now that she has done the oligarchs' bidding. And, this is just sad. And frustrating isn't even, infuriating is the word. That, everybody, Bernie called into the show about this last Thursday. Hey, it looks like we've got this thing, $3.5 billion. And now some of the Democrats in the Progressive Caucus, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeting this morning, Kyrsten Sinema, if you think you're going to blow up that $3.5 trillion bill, we're going to blow up your bill, your $1 trillion bill.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So maybe the entire thing is going to go to hell because Kyrsten Sinema couldn't get her act together. This is insane. And welcome back. Ronald in Los Angeles. Hey, Ronald, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
Good. What's on your mind?
A lot of stuff out here since Biden got elected, and I'm happy with the result, obviously. But it seems like for instance, my cousin, he's going back to school, and there was like an 8-hour, essentially before the year got started, and there was like this whole 8-hour, 250 plus speaker podium, which was talking about whether or not ethnic studies should be taught. And then that became like a weeks-long issue with critical race theory. And then out here, every other week there's been some type of like White Lives Matter or like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz adjacent event.
Yeah.
And it seems like if this is happening in Southern California, I don't know if this is happening. I feel like the ripples must be crazier across the country. But is this something to really worry about, or is this just a phase that's going to pass?
That's a good question, Ronald, and I don't know the answer to it. The Republican Party let's see, this is August, so we're basically 8 months into the Biden presidency. And they have gone through about maybe 24 different outrages du jour, things where they'd get all fluffed up about and yell and scream about, and it would be all over the right-wing headlines, and Fox News would be jumping all over it. And then, that one didn't work, and so they go on to the next one, and that one didn't work, and so they go on to the next one. And it looks like with critical race theory, they may have succeeded in flipping out, enough hardcore right-wing parents, and they're starting to try to take control of school boards and things like this. Arguing that this thing that isn't even taught in our public schools is like some existential threat to America. It's a shout out to the white supremacists. And I think that they're going to continue that. But what I'm seeing, Ronald, and maybe I'd get your temperature on this, get your take on this. I'm thinking that this is the last gasp of the white supremacist fringe in the Republican Party, which has now is probably more than half of the Republican Party, but it's still less than a third of America. So I think that they're going to have some impact. I think with regard to California, the biggest concern is that they're pushing this recall of Newsom. And that's all going to depend on turnout. And if the Republicans show up in big numbers and the Democrats go, oh, he's a good governor, well, I'm fine with him. But they're not going to show up and vote for him because they figure, who's going to be crazy enough to kick this guy out? He's doing a good job. And then it turns out the Republicans are crazy enough to kick him out. That it could throw California into chaos, which of course is their goal. But it seems to me like what you're looking at is the loud fringe. Is that your sense of it?
Yeah, it seems like it, because even when there's like an ideological issue, like there was this big uproar about Prop 47, and immediately it was the straw man, like, oh, Gavin Newsom has legalized, like stealing things. This is why all of these different stores are closing down, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And once there was like an issue on the table and there was a debate about it, I think there was something like a little over 60% of the conservatives liked the fact that there was a little over $100 million surplus that could go back into the communities.
Right.
So,
Yeah, there you go. So it's something that we all need to pay attention to, and we need to push back on, and we need to expose, and we need to fight. But I don't see that as the most existential threat. I think the most existential threat, frankly, is the right-wing billionaire class who's funding all this stuff. Ronald, thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? The last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I also want to highlight, my opening rant was basically about the right-wing billionaire class and how they've captured Kyrsten Sinema and apparently Joe Manchin as well. It's, the fossil fuel interest mostly. and perhaps a few of the other Democrats, and that's blocking progress. Now, that's kind of the bad news. The good news is that if we can't make things happen in the next year and a half, the next 18 months, there's going to be an election next November, a year from this November, in roughly 18 months from now, or even less than that, maybe 15 months from now. And in that election, you've got, a whole bunch of Republicans up for re-election or to fill seats for retiring. Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania is retiring, and you've got Fetterman, a really strong Democrat. I believe he's the Attorney General right now, maybe the Secretary of State, one or the other, in Pennsylvania. He's running for that seat. You've got Rob Portman in Ohio, who's retiring. There's some strong candidates. Tim Ryan's probably the strongest candidate running for that seat. So, maybe we can pick up a couple of seats in the 2022 election in the Senate, and we won't have to worry about what Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have to say. But right now, we've got to deal with that. So that was my opening rant. But there's a second step to this, and that is the right-wing crazies who are following Donald Trump and who don't believe in democracy. And this, I think, is another existential threat to America, and that's the authoritarian threat. The not just Trump followers, but the Republican followers and these right-wing Republican sites. They are just all over trying to support the states that are putting into place literally anti-democratic, both big D and small d. They're anti-democracy laws to make it harder to vote and to give election officials the power to say, Fulton County, Georgia, it's a lot of black people there. I'm not sure that I trust the vote coming out of there. We think there's fraud. We're just not going to count some of those votes. Keep in mind, when Trump started yelling about election fraud, and this does not get mentioned anywhere near enough in the media, Trump's whole rant about election fraud was not that there was, election fraud all across the country. It was that there was election fraud in black parts of the country. The county in Arizona with the largest black population, Maricopa County, is the only county that they're running a so-called audit on in Arizona right now. Trump said, it all happened in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, right? Large black populations in Pennsylvania. It all happened in Detroit, in Michigan, large black population. It all happened in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, large black population. Literally every single city where Trump was claiming there was election fraud was a majority black city. Atlanta, of course, Fulton County. Every single one. And now you've got 1/3 of the states in the United States have passed legislation to make it possible to essentially ignore, overturn, not count, purge, so people can't vote to begin with, the people from those very places all across the United States. Thomas Mann, who is a senior fellow at Washington's Brookings Institution and a resident scholar at UC Berkeley, came forward and he says, America is on the precipice. We are in danger of losing our democracies thanks to Trump and these extremists that he has empowered. He said, we've always had extremist groups on the left as well as the right, but they've always been marginalized or co-opted to become more moderate. This is the first time in the history of America a set of forces like this has actually won the White House and tried to steal it a second time, which is exactly what Trump tried to do. And now he says if Trump had won that second term, we would have passed Hungary pretty quickly in becoming an autocratic world but a dangerous world, end quote. He adds, the GOP has become an insurgent outlier in American politics, ideologically extreme, scornful of compromise, unmoved by facts, evidence, and science, dismissive of the legitimacy of the political opposition. This is a dangerous moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
How do we turn this back? Obviously, we need leadership from Washington, D.C., but we also need leadership on the ground. That's you and me. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step.
But single payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
Yeah. Or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlord. You know, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, you know, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at thomhartmann.com. So, what are your thoughts on where this is all going? And you know, I'm actually as doom and gloomish as I may have sounded in the first half of this hour. You know, pointing out that we've got psychopathic billionaires who have largely captured the Republican Party and a few Democrats as well. And pointing out that, you know, we've faced these kinds of severe crises. Now, this is the fourth time in our history, literally the fourth turning, to quote Strauss and Howe, the title of their book. I'm seeing also a Republican Party that, because of the corruption by right-wing psychopathic billionaires, whether it's the billionaires who funded Trump explicitly because they loved his white supremacist message, or whether it's the billionaires who are just funding the, you know, your mainstream so-called conservative politicians, the business crowd who are funding the Paul Ryans of the world and are now funding the Kirsten Sinemas and Joe Manchins of the world. Their overreach inevitably leads to extremism and general craziness, and we're hearing that. We're seeing. I mean, you got Kevin McCarthy right now standing in front of Congress yelling at Nancy Pelosi for wanting to have masks, for wanting to have people wear masks in Congress to protect the members, including the half of the Republicans who refuse to say if they're vaccinated, and to protect the staff. It's a workplace. We've got a dozen major corporations now, including like Facebook and Google and Lyft, and you know, who have said, and Saks Fifth Avenue and one of the major banks, I don't recall if it was Goldman Sachs or one of the other ones, who have all now put into place vaccine mandates. If you want to work in this place of business, you must be vaccinated. We have that here. Everybody on our staff is vaccinated. Actually, I didn't have to mandate it. I've got smart people working for me. So I didn't even have to say, you must. You know, it was like, hey, how do we, you know, everybody was, they were ahead of me. But the Republicans are just melting down around this stuff because they're just desperately grasping. Oh, is it critical race theory? Oh, are those police officers who were testifying just drama queens and crisis actors? Oh, it was actually the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th were hugging and kissing the police. Quack, 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 right? And America is watching this. And I don't think it's going to go well for the Republicans in the 2022 elections. And we're seeing now the obstruction of things that will fix this, not just by Republicans, but now by Kyrsten Sinema as well. And I think politically their days are numbered. I really do believe that change is, we thought change was coming with the Biden administration, and he's done a lot of great stuff, and they've passed a lot of, many good things. But I'm actually very optimistic. I'm very concerned about climate change and how bad it is. It's going to be 100 degrees here again this weekend. We've got another one of these heat domes. We've got to do something about this. But that said, if Michael Mann, who was on the show yesterday, as I recall, is right, we still have a couple of years to stop anything totally irreversible. Now, I go back and forth, thinking, very hopefully, yes, that's true, and and then on the other hand, thinking maybe we've passed the point of no return. I honestly don't know, but you don't stop trying. We've got to do everything we can. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls here. Teresa in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. Hey, I really appreciate your focus on climate change. That's so important. I have an analogy that I like to tell people about climate change. I like to say, okay, it's like we're all in a car, and, someone's driving. I don't know who in this analogy, but there's a cliff ahead, and instead of putting on the brakes, the driver's putting on the accelerator. It's like we are still increasing our carbon emissions.
Yeah.
And
they did go down in 2020, but they have gone back up again.
Yeah, and I think it's like, and then everyone else in the car is saying, "Oh, someone will think of something."
Right.
And I'm looking around saying, "Okay, who's going to think of what?" Because I can see the cliff, and if I extrapolate what we're doing right now, we're going over.
And here the Democrats came up with this $3.5 trillion bill that would have done not just something, but a lot of something. And we've got a couple of Democrats, well, at least one, who has explicitly come out and said no, Kyrsten Sinema. It's just, it is so distressing.
It's just crazy, And I just want to put in one more plug. I don't know if you know who Jim Massa is, M-A-S-S-A, I think it is. He's got a great series of videos out. He's a scientist up in Alaska doing some really good science YouTubes, and he'd be a great guest. I really like his presentation. So there's just a little plug for some further, education. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Teresa. I'll check him out. The name sounds familiar, but I can't pull up anything, a picture of a face or anything like that, so I'll have to check it out. Teresa, thank you very much for the call. It's nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Brad, what's up?
Hey, I lived in Arizona for 7 years, and I was never really impressed with Kyrsten Sinema. I think, and it shows because when she first was campaigning, very, very low-key stuff, no big propositions, nothing. She was very
well, she started out as a Green,
lukewarm.
And then she endorsed Bernie Sanders, and she said she proclaimed herself to be a progressive, and now she's proclaiming herself to be part of the problem solver, no labels thing, which is funded by Wall Street. Yeah,
and here's my point. I think she is a cynical, self-serving person who's only interested in her re-election.
I agree.
She loves her designer labels, and that kind of stuff costs money to pay for.
Yeah.
And I'll take my comment off there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Brad. I get it, and the analogy that I've mentioned in the past is Roseanne Barr. A politician who went from being a Green to running for president on another third party to suddenly supporting Donald Trump, basically going wherever the news media would follow her. whatever would get her the most publicity. And I think it's unfortunate. I think it's sad. But, hey, it's there. Let's see here. Carlos in Carson, California. Hey, Carlos, what's up?
Well, listen, you mentioned that the oligarchs finance the right wing. You're absolutely right, but they also finance the left wing.
I think that's what I just said, Carlos.
Well, wait, let me explain a little further more here. George Soros was a representative of the Rothschild banking family.
No. We're not going to. Carlos, last time you called, you were doing this anti-vax thing, and this time it's the anti-Semite thing. I think that's kind of it for Carlos. It's like, yes, Rothschild, that sounds Jewish. Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, it's kind of like your double Santa Claus theory. I'm thinking that really it's the Republicans that cause us to have to raise taxes because they only support the military, police department, and the fire department because it protects their assets domestically and abroad. And that...
Well, also a lot of their assets are manufacturing things for the police departments and the military. I mean, and Reagan was the one who shifted, who started the program where military gear would go right to our police departments. This was all to help the defense contractors.
And remember the New World Order, Bush and Reagan.
Yeah.
Remember when they discussed the New World Order and they said, we can't raise workers' wages in this country until third world countries and competitor countries do the same thing.
Yeah.
Because the market wouldn't be fair. But they don't realize the cost of living in third world countries and China is a lot different than here.
Oh, yeah. The whole neoliberal free trade thing has been a disaster, for some time, and it's going to continue to be a disaster. I'm with you. Stephen, thank you for that. That's kind of another topic, but one of these days we'll get into it. Kevin in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, Thomas, first-time caller, and I enjoy your show.
Thank you.
Personally, Sinema would not be reelected. Keeping that attitude and how she's behaving, she would not be reelected.
Oh, she's toast in 2024. But Paul Ryan, when he left the House of Representatives, he took $7 million with him.
Yeah. Another thing, Tom, what I think needs to be done because this voter, as a black person, this voter has got these voter bills have to pass, right?
Yeah.
Not only that, infrastructure it looks like it's not going to pass now because of Sinema. That has to pass.
Mm-hmm.
I mean. Biden and Harris administration had to show that they're doing something for the voters because otherwise, with the suppression of the votes, and people do go out and vote, some people just won't vote. Suppression and people not doing anything.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of me going to vote?
Yeah, well, and let me put a punctuation mark on that, Kevin. There's number one, how it disheartens people, but number two, the guy who runs one of Stacey Abrams' organizations in Georgia. When he was asked, if they can't undo the filibuster and pass the For the People Act so that the Georgia law can get knocked down, what's going to happen in 2022? And he said, we're effed. I mean, it's like, that's it. It's they are as we speak right now in this very moment, they are replacing in black neighborhoods in downtown in Atlanta. They are replacing African-American election officials with white Republicans who are going to make sure that the vote turns out the right way. I mean, this is nuts, this takeover. Kevin, I got to move along, but thank you so much for the call. And thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. I look forward to a future conversation where we have a little more time. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Dealing with oligarchy, dealing with white supremacy, dealing with right-wing crazies. We got a big lift. And welcome back. Diamond in Hollywood. Hey, Diamond, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I'm just calling. Basically, I slightly disagree with you with regard to the progressive saying, people saying, oh, Newsom's doing a great job in staying home. I'm talking to some of my progressive friends and myself. A lot of us are disappointed that he reopened everything just all of a sudden. And but what we have to realize is, what's the alternative? Our alternative is, a Republican who's going to, be even worse. So what I've done is I've called, and I urge callers in California to do this, is I wrote Newsom and I said, thank you for, being strong again against the Republicans. Thank you for, saying everybody needs to get vaccinated. Now we need to be tougher on mask mandates. My friend and I are performers, but we do not mind, having a vaccine verification for bars and venues like that.
Yep.
We think that only vaccinated people should be allowed to do that, or people that have tested. And I mean tested not 72 hours, but the day before they visit, because, we need to get the virus down. And in the news today, there was, I think it was the CDC, who said, if everybody wears masks and everybody vaccinates, in 2 weeks we can get the Delta under control.
Oh, yeah, but that would require everybody, and we're at about, a little more than half of the country is fully vaccinated. With regard to Gavin Newsom, the thing that concerns me, Diamond, and maybe you know something I don't, but I've seen at least a half a dozen articles in the last, 2-3 weeks suggesting that polling among voters in California suggests that the Republicans who are going to turn out to evict Gavin Newsom are highly motivated and fully intending to vote, and that Democrats, by and large, are, don't take this seriously and are not intending to vote. And that concerns me.
Well, I think that if people realize that, my response from Newsom was, every time somebody calls, every time someone writes Newsom, they have to write it down, just like you say on your blurb for everybody to call Washington. Mm-hmm. Progressives need to call Newsom. He does listen. And therefore, we can get more impetus for people to actually want to go to the polls. If more progressives just realize that. So I think that can draw people, and then Newsom will get, it won't get recalled.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, from your lips to God's ears, Diamond. It concerns me tremendously, because it looks like, all over the country, wherever there's a little chink in the armor, wherever there's a little niche where the Republicans can kind of burrow in and damage things, screw things up, create chaos, they are on it. And they got a lot of money behind them. So, Diamond, I have to run.
Democrats need to be too.
I agree. So let's get out there and work. Diamond, thank you so much for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. We'll be back. It's coming up on, it is 9 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time, and that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Tony in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Great show today, Tom, as always.
Thank you.
Yeah. In Texas, everyone that's yelling about vaccine passports, here's a little thing that Texas has that our oblivious senator doesn't know about or doesn't want to acknowledge. When you go in to get a vaccine, you're given a card. Well, you're given a questionnaire, and then once you get your first shot, you're given a card. You know, it's got your name, it's got your information on it. It has the type of shot that you have. It has the date of the first shot and the second shot. And at the same time, you're also registered in the state's registry, and you also have the option of reporting that you've been vaccinated to your primary physician.
That's correct.
And at the same time, this card, you're given the card, which I have in my wallet right now, which to me, that kind of seems like a vaccine passport.
You bet. You bet. And now it's digital. You know, if you check out the VSafe program from the CDC, they've got a vaccine passport there. They just haven't turned it into an app. But you can literally pull it up after you fill out the stuff. It will connect to your state's database and pull out your information on your shot and build a little database for you with what looks like a vaccine passport. It's just that, you know, they,
right.
like I said, they haven't turned it into an app yet. And I also have Clear, and in fact, Sean also signed up for it. She's got a free account. Clear offers free accounts. Clear.com, I think, is the website. And they have a real vaccine passport that they're actually using in Hawaii. If you're going to get on an airplane and fly to Hawaii, you've got to have some proof of vaccination, and they're recognizing the Clear vaccine passport. So, you know, there's companies that are actually doing this right now. It's not some pie-in-the-sky thing.
So what you're talking about, it sounds like the Excelsior pass that they have in New York.
In New York, right. And California is on their way to having one, a similar program. And I think this is essential. I think it's critical. I think it's really important if we're going to get back to normal. Tony, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. It was a great point. Mike in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom.
Hey.
Excuse me. Yeah, it's easy for Cortez to pronounce or promote 70%, but how come Pelosi or Schumer doesn't come right out and say, okay, we need this? And
I don't know what the this is that you're talking about here, Mike, or the 70%. What are you talking about?
The higher tax rate.
I don't think anybody is suggesting that the top tax rate should be 70%. I'll say it should go back to 74%, where it was when Reagan came into office and the economy was just humming along. But, you know, there's no politician out there who's promoting that.
No, but they ain't got the nerve to, because they know, okay, all these spending bills they want to promote, they keep saying, okay, we're going to raise the corporate tax rate when the corporations ain't going to pay the tax. But they won't change the tax codes to go after the rich oligarchs that you keep talking about.
I think that day is coming. I really do, Mike.
Well, they ain't going to propose it before this next election, I'll guarantee you that.
Probably, but there is a significant, when Joe Biden was elected, he made the promise he's not going to raise taxes on anybody who earns over $400,000 a year. But if you earn more than $400,000 a year, Katie, bar the door, right? And there's a chunk of that in this $3.5 trillion bill.
Well, come out and say it. I mean, okay, they pass these bills, and it's going to be the middle class and everybody else that pays it. Why don't they even just go after these stock options payouts?
Yep. Well, I don't know if that has made its way into this $3.5 trillion bill yet. We haven't seen the details, but there certainly is a lot of talk about that, about changing the way that CEOs are compensated and even taxing stock trades. I mean, that's Elizabeth Warren has been promoting that, and Bernie Sanders has been promoting that for years. Mike, I got to move along, but your points are well made. Your points are very well made. Thank you very much for the call, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. We will be back in, hang on just a second here in just a moment. We've got a lot to talk about. Professor Richard Wolff is with us next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann. Line with us is our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. And rdwolff at 2fs.com, also one of his websites. And you can tweet him at profwolff with 2fs. And Professor Wolff, I have my newsletter here from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, Dean Baker's group. And they're noting that GDP rose 6.5% in the second quarter, so we're now back above the pre-pandemic level of economic output. The growth is still strong. Profit is up, among American corporations. Savings rate is up to 10%. Some good economic signs on the one hand. On the other hand, we've got this attempt by the Democrats, this $3.5 trillion bill and then the smaller $550 billion bill, they're calling the $1 trillion bill, to put together our infrastructure. And Kirsten Sinema has come out and said, no, I'm not going to, pass that. And so, which just got a lot of Democrats really freaked out. What happens if we don't continue to move away from the last 40 years of neoliberalism and austerity and move back into the economy as it worked before Reagan. What happens if we can't pull that off with this kind of legislation?
Well, then we're going to go further down the road that we've been going down, and that's a very, very bad economic prospect. Let's be really clear. For the last 40 years, the mantra, the religion, if you like, has been a kind of economic fundamentalism, very like its religious parallel. And that fundamentalism said everything is better done by the private sector than by the government. Everything is efficient in the private sector, inefficient in the government, etc., etc. Well, we now have the results. A neglect of something typically done by governments, which is how it gets done in every other country, namely attending to the infrastructure, which is very expensive, which is risky, which is more important than most other things governments do, but the notion that if you leave it to the private sector, they would somehow take care of it, well, we see the result. A collapsed infrastructure, an infrastructure way behind other countries. And so, yes, the Democrats see here yet again an opportunity, if they're successful, to do something about this, to have the government undertake the kinds of major infrastructure programs that, of course, are more expensive now because they were delayed, are more contentious now because the Republicans have mobilized forces to be critical because they come out of this 40-year fundamentalism. So I'm very worried. I think it may very well not pass. And then, as your question implies, we're going to have an even greater descent of our economy. Look, we have monumental economic problems. The 6.5% you began with, that's a bounce back from a catastrophic collapse last year. Countries around the world are showing comparable special numbers in the second quarter of this year because we've gotten it going again. But we still have a long way to go to make up for what happened last year. Meanwhile, inequality is getting worse. The very processes that we neglected over the last 40 years are like those proverbial chickens coming home to roost.
You know, when Phil Gramm went on the floor of the Senate in 1999 and said, we don't need Glass-Steagall anymore because it's worked so well, I think if he had tried saying that, allowed banks to start gambling with our money, basically, I think if he had said that 30 years earlier when there were people in the Senate who had lived through the Great Depression, he would have been laughed off the floor of the Senate. Arnold Toynbee famously said, when the last man dies who remembers the horrors of the last Great War, the next Great War becomes inevitable. And it seems like every 80 years we just go through these cycles of forgetting the same stupid mistakes and the oligarchs coming in and taking over. And 80 years ago now it was, the Republican Great Depression. 80 years before that, it was the oligarchs in the South who rose up and tried to destroy democracy with the Civil War. 80 years before that, it was the British East India Company that we fought a revolution against. What are your feelings about the possibilities that we can actually push our way through this or fight our way through it successfully for what will be the fourth time in the history of the United States?
Well, here's the irony. In many ways, it strikes me that we are now on something psychologists would call a kind of death trip, a determination of the richest people in the society simply to accumulate ever more. We've just gone through, we're still in it, the worst combination imaginable in our society. An economic crash rivaling that of the 1930s, and at the same time, the worst public health disaster in a century. We've never had these two kinds of things happening to us at the same time. And they need a massive coordinated mobilization of both the public and the private resources. Only the government can do that. And if you're in a society in which the government is hamstrung because of this fundamentalist religion that somehow has to favor the private and hobble the public, then you get super rich people during the last year becoming even richer while we don't vaccinate half our people, while the vaccination rate in Africa is 3%, which means that continent is incubating the new variants to threaten us. The craziness of this, which would be extended by not passing the infrastructure bill, really suggests a society that is engaged in self-destruction and needs really profound shake-up to get out of it.
Now, much of the insanity that the Reagan administration brought us came out of the Chicago School of Economics, out of your profession, you know, Milton Friedman and Robert Bork and their buddies, you know, changing the way that we treated monopolies, dropping the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%, deregulating corporations, all these kinds of things. To what extent in your field, among your colleagues in economics, has that whole, you know, right-wing neoliberal and worse perspective been discredited, or is it still alive? Is the Friedman and von Mises and whatnot school still? Is that still a potent force?
Absolutely is, and I wish it weren't, but it is. Economics as a profession, you know, most of the folks that are the people you know, like Milton Friedman and the others, are tenured professors, as I have been most of my life. And you cannot get rid of them. They're there, and they typically in American universities, when they hire younger folks, hire people who they find attractive, which are people who agree with them by and large. And so the profession is way behind the ball in terms of what's happening. There have been a few people, Paul Krugman, Joe Stiglitz, people like that, who were shaken over the last 20 years by what they were willing to see, and so they've stopped being that kind of neoclassical, we call them, economist. But they haven't gone much more than back towards a kind of Keynesian out of the 1930s. They think, and I believe they're deeply mistaken, that all we need again is another dose of Keynesian, you know, New Deal type of stuff. But the problem I keep having when I discuss with them, and I went to school with them, and I know them personally too, the problem is we're in a different place. Mm-hmm. We don't have what we had in the 1930s. We have a much bigger private sector. We have it much deeper in debt. We have horrific inequality that has undone most of what the New Deal did. We have a major, serious competitor in the People's Republic of China, which we are not able to neither stop nor control. These were situations, these are new problems. Plus, when I say, again, that we've had a major collapse of our public health system together with our economic system, you need a massive overhaul. But the attempt of the few Democrats willing to do that has been stymied by the Republicans, but also by the conservatives who are still living in the new neoliberal Reagan era in which they thought it was necessary to be a booster of the private sector, no matter what the cost to social cohesion. And so our society isn't cohesive, it's divided. It's a very serious denial problem that's at the root of our difficulties.
Amen. We're facing some really serious challenges here. Professor Richard Wolff, It's always good speaking with you. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking to you. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls as well right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's your media support group for We the People. Back right after this. And welcome back. Charlotte in San Diego, California. Hey, Charlotte, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Sure. Hi, Tom. Yesterday, we were hearing on the news that they thought that we were going to get this bipartisan deal, that it was going to be, and look at, they got 17 Republicans, and how surprising that was. Although when they were interviewing some of these people, Susan Collins, I think, was one of them that was like, whoa, wait, we've got a long way to go here before we have a done deal.
They haven't even written the bill yet.
Right.
I mean, this is all, what they agreed to yesterday was simply to move the process forward to where they can begin to finish writing the deal and then begin debate on it. They literally aren't even beginning debate on it.
Right, so everybody's thinking that this could go through, but now, and Kyrsten Sinema now has suddenly popped up this morning saying that she's not for this $3.5 trillion deal.
Right.
And I just wonder if I keep hearing things from other progressive stations and stuff where they're taping interviews of people, and like Santorum talking to his Republican colleagues or his Republican supporters saying, you need to call Kyrsten Sinema and Manchin and thank them for standing up and protecting us and blah, blah, blah. I think Sinema and Manchin need to be exposed by the Democratic Party for the connivers that they are. And I think that Kyrsten Sinema probably said, look, guys, all of you guys, if you want to, Republicans, you can vote for this, because I'm not going to vote for the big the big bill only Democrats will approve. So then there's no danger that the small one's going to go through, because Nancy Pelosi said the small one won't go through if the large one doesn't go through, and I'm going to nix the large one, so now there's not going to be a small one. And that's why you got 17 Republicans.
Yeah, and frankly, I think, and including Mitch McConnell, by the way, which takes me back to my conspiracy theory that I laid out in the first hour, that I believe that the reason why the Republicans are now going along, or at least a number of them, are more than they need, more than the 10 they need, are going along with the so-called $1 trillion bill. Let's be very clear. It's $500 billion in new spending. They're appropriating money out of money that the federal government already has. They're basically moving money around for the other half of it. So this is a very small bill, and it's over a 10-year period. That's $50 billion a year. That's a drop in the bucket. So, but in any case, the reason I believe that the Republicans are willing to go along with that $1 trillion bill is because they believe that this will cause Americans to think that infrastructure has been taken care of, everything's good, the Republicans and the Democrats are together on this, and therefore there's no need for action on this $3.5 trillion bill that is being promoted by people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Oh, my God.
Yeah, and therefore,
I think it's a deflection.
Yeah, but I think that once, like AOC has come out and said she won't support the smaller deal without the bigger deal, I think that Sinema's already cursed it. I think she's already told him she's not going to approve the big deal. You don't approve the big deal, then the small deal doesn't go through.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see if there is still the opportunity for a negotiation here, or if this is just turning into a terrible stalemate within the Democratic Party.
I think it's all a sham by Sinema and Nancy.
I agree. Charlotte, thank you for the call. I think you nailed it. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 22 minutes past the hour. And, excuse me, the UK numbers. I want to just lay another thought on you here before we pick up your phone calls and move along with the show. And that has to do with the coronavirus right now and this proclamation. People are getting very mixed messages. I mean, it's very confusing right now. Yeah, even if you're paying attention to rational media, it's even worse if you're trying to follow Fox News, or right-wing hate radio. But the UK has now come out and said, the United Kingdom has come out and said, our virus cases are actually going down right now. And they got the Delta variant before we did. And, about 2-3 weeks ahead. And so there are people in the United States who are going, well, the numbers are going down in the UK. That means they're going to go down here in the next couple of weeks. We can just chill out. Don't worry. Be happy. And I think Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos has done just a great service to humanity by pointing out that the United Kingdom is made up of a bunch of other countries, including Wales and Scotland, or arguably countries, including Wales and Scotland, semi-independent groups that have not come out of essentially lockdown, that still have mask mandates in place, that still have social distancing requirements in place. The title of his piece over at Daily Kos is "Falling Cases in the UK Are Not a Sign That the U.S. Can Safely Remove Masks or Drop Restrictions." And what he points out is that in Scotland, which still has which is part of the United Kingdom. So when you're looking at UK numbers, keep this in mind. In Scotland, with they have vaccines, masks are still in place, social distancing is still in place, and because of those three things, their cases are down 50%. In Wales, with masks, vaccine, and social distancing, cases are down 35%. In England, which is the only one of the three on the island there that has declared Freedom Day, cases are only down 3%. And that's probably because they're at 70% full vaccination. We're at only, 50 some odd percent full vaccination. I think it's in the mid 60s for one shot. I mean, we're moving there, but, we're not there. And frankly, neither is England. So, if somebody says to you, oh, the numbers in the United Kingdom are down, everything's good, you don't have to worry, it's, just be happy. Ask them, well, what about England? Cases are, 3% drop is not a real statistical drop. Cases are down dramatically in Wales and in Scotland, which are adjacent to England, on the island of the British Isles. But they still have mask mandates in place. They still have social distancing in place. This is a very, very different thing. So anyhow, I wanted to flag that for you. I think it's important that we all pay attention to it. John in Chicago. Hey, John, you had some thoughts you wanted to share?
Yes. I just wanted to give some historical context to what Professor Wolff was saying. I read a book a long time ago, Jared Diamond's Collapse, in which they theorized that Easter Island fell apart because they tore up all the trees on the island to make the Easter Island heads. And they destroyed their culture just to benefit the elites of that culture so that they could all have their special monuments. And in trying to get it out of a political realm, what has happened is that, societies collapse when elites no longer have to suffer consequences for the decisions that they make. And I wonder if there's some parallels to what's happening in the United States, where the wealthy got wealthier during one of the worst times in American history.
That's brilliant.
And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Spot on, John. It's a brilliant analysis. I read Collapse when it came out. That was, 10, 12 years ago? Jared Diamond came out with that book. And it's amazing. I read the same book, and I didn't make that connection that you just made. But I think that your connection is absolutely right. And that's exactly what's going on here, is that the elites, the billionaire class of the United States, do not suffer the consequences of the decisions that they're imposing on the rest of us, and all the more the problem. John, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll continue our conversation right after this break. It's 27 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Telling the truth, the multinational corporations and right-wing billionaires would really rather you didn't know.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your phone calls right after this break. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP, because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
My loved one diagnosed with incurable cancer will somehow make it. The book, On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope by DeRay McKesson.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at hartmannreport.com. And our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, thomhartmann.com. Maywood, Illinois. This is not our friend Kenyatta from Los Angeles who calls regularly, but another Kenyatta. Kenyatta, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Well, I disagree with you about the vaccine. I'm not going to get it. Reason being, I'm black, African American, and you know the history very well of governments doing weird things with shots to black folks. You know what I mean?
So if you got cancer, you wouldn't go to the doctor?
That's not the same, Tom. That's not the same at all.
If you got pneumonia, you wouldn't go to the doctor?
Well, I'd go to the doctor, sure, but I don't think I would take a vaccine that's not even approved by the FDA.
Well, it has been approved by the FDA. It has not been fully approved. That's coming in the next month or so. It's been approved by the equivalent of the FDA, pretty much every other country in the world, all across the world. This is not government, Kenyatta. This is scientists. You've got scientists all across the planet. You've got scientists across Africa who are saying use this. You've got governments across Africa, as well as every other country in the world, saying do this. It's going to save your life. You are taking your life and the life of the people that you love and you interact with in your hands. You're risking that.
Well, I already had COVID, so I don't really even see the need for a vaccine.
If you did not have the Delta variant, the Delta variant can infect you a second time.
Yeah. But
having had COVID is no protection.
I don't, well, you know about the government doing experiments on.
Hey, the government did
folks.
terrible things to black people. I'm with you. You know, I mean, our government enslaved black people. Our government sanctioned it. Our government wouldn't even let black people vote until 1965. We're only marginally a multiracial society. Your concerns are 100% legitimate in that regard. But this is not that. This is not the Tuskegee experiment.
How do you know that? I mean,
because
I don't even know what these vaccines. I don't even know.
Well, you can look it up. That information is public knowledge. It's not a secret.
I did. It's another language. It's like I don't even know what this stuff is. We don't even know the long-term side effects of this stuff. I'm worried, Tom.
I can tell you the long-term side effects of COVID are well known. The blood clots cause strokes. They cause brain damage. They cause male impotence, probably for the rest of your life. They cause kidney damage. They cause liver damage. They cause death. I mean, the side effects of the disease are well known.
I'm talking about the vaccine. We don't know it. It's been too soon. I don't trust Operation Warp Speed from Trump. I'm telling you that right now. I do not trust that.
Yeah, this is not Trump. Donald Trump did not develop this vaccine. Donald Trump is a fool. Donald Trump threw some money at Moderna. This vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine in particular, was developed in Germany. And you're becoming a one-note rant here. So I'm going to let you go. It looks like I'm not going to convince you, but I think that everybody listening gets it, how important it is that we save each other, that we help each other, and that we care for each other. And I'm so saddened, by that phone call. Anyhow, Glenn in Olivet, Michigan. Glenn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. My wife and I, we watch your show, and my wife had a concern about the vaccination passport because of her health reasons. Her primary care physician, the doctors down at the University of Michigan, they bend over backwards to keep her safe. Fortunately, she's very tired, so she doesn't have to worry about too much. But what she's really concerned about is, she doesn't shop or go out to eat or anything like that. But what would a vaccination passport look like for people with healthcare issues where they can't have the vaccine?
Well, that's a really good and legitimate question, Glenn. And as far as I know, Clear doesn't have here's an exception kind of thing. What most venues are doing, and pretty much everybody, even when they say you must have proof of vaccination, like the cruise lines, for example, they're saying if you can't provide proof of vaccination, because there are people who have autoimmune disorders, or they're going through cancer therapy, or in the past they've reacted badly to just vaccines in general, who just can't take vaccines. It's a very, very small subset of our population. It's a fraction of 1%, or actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know the actual number, but it's a very small percentage of our population. But what they all say is you must show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test within the last 7 days. So that's what it would look like. Would be, if she wants to go to a public venue, if she wants to go, if we had, like restaurants have vaccine passports, the restaurant would say, either show proof of vaccination or proof of a negative COVID test within the last 7 days. And that's become the standard across the country.
Yeah, we truly believe in the vaccine. She's a retired RN, and we believe in science, but, she considers you very valid.
No, I get it. There are some people who have medical conditions that prevent them from getting vaccinated, and that's the out for them. Glenn, thank you for the call. Robert in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just want to, give you a counter argument to the African American guy that just called a few minutes ago saying he wouldn't get the vaccine because he don't know what's in it. Hey, I'm African American. The Tuskegee experiment, that was, the people already had syphilis. That's people withholding treatment, penicillin. I wish people would just read and, do their research before they put his life, his family's life, and lives in danger. It's just, it's common sense. My wife is a nurse. She had to get it through her job. I got it. My entire family is going to get it.
It's saving lives.
You got to protect each other.
Yeah, we have to protect each other.
We have to protect each other. Just like you told him, Tom. If you get sick, you're going to the hospital. I'm pretty sure he has the polio vaccine. Pretty sure he has the smallpox vaccine. And then coming up in the African American community, the way we eat is a long-term side effect. And now you're worried about a vaccine? I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I'll take my off the air.
Okay,
Great show. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. It's good to hear from you. I appreciate it. And to our friend Kenyatta in Los Angeles, the other Kenyatta. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm fairly speechless, but given the previous caller with the same name. But be that as it may, I do. Let me just say that history is history, and particularly for Black people in the United States, we are constantly dealing with the demons of our history here. And it doesn't have to be the vaccine. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I am not a person that has an opinion on it really one way or the other. I think you should do what common sense tells you, and you should do what is best for your health. But, I mean, there are all kinds of things that happen on an everyday basis, Tom. A person will make some bold move when you're in the car or cut you off. And you always ask yourself, did that happen because I was Black? Someone will cut you off in a grocery store line, and you ask yourself, and this is the real tragedy of what's happened to us, but that's not really why I called. But I do want, because I was actually watching your show and kind of glancing back at your chat room, and there were a couple of people who said, this doesn't sound like Kenyatta. So I just wanted to
it wasn't.
clear that up. But I did want to talk about this infrastructure package and hope that folks really realize how important this is, Tom. Our infrastructure, we have pipes in Los Angeles, water pipes, that are over 100 years old. Yeah. The electrical grid in this country is a hodgepodge of ancient technologies as technology goes. And this is, I think you had a caller earlier talk about a national security issue. China spends inordinate amounts of money on their infrastructures. They've got high-speed rail. They've got all kinds of social disasters we don't have, and we can trace those social disasters in our country, in the United States, to infrastructure. And think about this. Think if the power grid in the United States, think about 72 hours with the United States without power. Think of that. Think of what would happen with 400 million guns in the street.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah. No, it's. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's and not just that. I mean, just the public health. I mean, look at what happened in Texas when the power went down because it got too cold. People died. I mean, I think it was over 100 people died in Texas as a consequence.
Of course,
of that.
Because those idiots don't want to be part of the rest of the. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. You're right. You nailed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've said enough.
Well, and you said it very well, as you always do. Kenyatta, thanks a lot. It's great to hear from you.
Bye-bye.
Good talking with you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We will be back with more of your calls and my thoughts. And I've got a little bit of a geeky science here. There is a blood marker. This is the headline from Nature, the big science magazine. A blood marker predicts who gets breakthrough COVID. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Helping you win the water cooler wars now that at least some of us are back to the water cooler. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question for you regarding H.R. 1. I'm afraid that if Biden doesn't expand the Supreme Court, if H.R. 1 passes hypothetically, can the GOP go to the Supreme Court and challenge it?
They've
And I
already
take my
announced
answer
that
off
they
the
intend
air?
to.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Are we in trouble?
Yeah, I think so. And this is why, it's going to take some large and bold policy moves to put this country back together. We're trying to deal with 40 years of damage done by Reaganism and the rise of the Republican oligarchy. And an awful lot of it came out of the Supreme Court. I mean, what made Reagan possible was the Buckley and Bellotti decisions in 76 and 78. It's just, we've got a big lift, but, we have to keep working. And we need to keep working on that lift. So, Alfredo, thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. Fair in Stoddard, New Hampshire. Hey, Fair, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to just give you an idea about the infrastructure bill.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard Jeff Bezos when he came back from space and he had his big press conference. And he was talking about putting polluting industries into space.
Right.
And then we'd have to build all this infrastructure that would take decades to put in place. And then he started saying, well, when with my company, I already had all the infrastructure I needed to make, trillions of dollars.
Right. We have public roads.
So why doesn't he want to pay
airports.
for that infrastructure? So his quote really of the importance of that infrastructure to his company, and then he doesn't want to pay any taxes for it.
Right. He's paying less than 3% income taxes, or effectively.
But Amazon doesn't pay taxes on their profits.
Yeah. But
what I'm saying is, what he was saying is that the infrastructure was there for me, and I needed this infrastructure. It could be inferred out of what he said.
Yeah.
You should listen to it.
Yeah. No,
Really.
I did, and I caught that irony, and I thought that when he went off on this thing about polluting industries, that we should just move them into space. It's like, has it not dawned on this guy who just burned 35 tons of rocket fuel to get into outer space that there's a pollution cost to get into space?
The whole thing was a ridiculous, egotistic-driven suggestion.
Well, it shocked me how disconnected from reality he was. I talked about this on the air. I said, I think that this must be one of those billionaires who lives in a complete bubble where, some celebrities are like this as well, and some politicians, where they just live in a bubble and all the people around them always tell them how right they are and how wonderful they are. And it's like the kings of old.
It's all about them,
Yeah.
But we could still use what he said about the infrastructure system that was there for him.
Yeah. If anybody really...
This new infrastructure bill.
The problem is I don't think that anybody takes
right.
Jeff Bezos, seriously as a commentator on political issues. But I get your point, Fair. I absolutely get your point. Fair, I got to run. Thank you for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truth to the multinational corporations would really rather didn't know all about. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at thomhartmann.com. I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now, and this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Delvin in Chicago. Hey, Delvin, what's on your mind?
What's going on, Tom? How you doing?
I'm well. What's up?
Okay, here's a question I have to ask. Why are we jamming up our hospitals and going back into this COVID when there's a vaccine out there that can actually protect you? Shouldn't the hospital have the right to turn away patients who refuse to take the vaccine but yet still get COVID and want to clog up the hospital?
Well, hospitals don't turn away people whose lifestyle, who smoked and they got lung cancer, or who binged on sugar for years and years and they got diabetes. We just don't do that in this country. But I get your point. I'm assuming you're essentially responding to the earlier caller who said he wasn't going to get the vaccine because of Tuskegee.
Yeah, because, I'm African American. We can say we're not going to drive automobiles because maybe the first automobile people died in accidents. But, we're living in 2021. Yeah. But to me, to clog up, to have these people, and I've spoken with non-vaxxers to say, well, I'm not getting it because I don't believe it. I'm not getting it because it's going to do this or that to me. So if you know you are putting your life at risk or you're putting your health at risk, why? I don't not get it. The hospital can't turn away patients. But at some point, it's like, there's people who are sick. There's people who can't help because they have cancer, a lung cancer. Yeah. Why are we jamming up the hospitals? Just let these people live their life and they get COVID, whatever happens, happens.
Or let's all get vaccinated, and so that we can protect the people who can't get vaccinated, that very small percentage of people, like the guy who called earlier, his wife, has a blood disorder or whatever it was and can't take a vaccine. Yeah, I'm with you. Delvin, thank you. That's
the common sense thing to do. Right.
Yeah,
all right.
There you go. Thank you, Delvin. Good, and thanks for listening to WCPT. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's up?
Well, I'm going to follow on with the brother that just got off the phone. I happen to be one who was vaccinated with the Pfizer, both of them. Mm-hmm. And what it has done, given me a sense of liberation and a sense of security, because I do have underlying conditions. Mm-hmm. And by having the vaccine, taking the 2 vaccines, it kind of shored me up in my health, so to speak, mentally speak.
I'm with you.
Now,
me too.
It's like when we use our history in a way to which does not afford us the ability to reason and to be rational. That's a case of having a little knowledge, which is dangerous, right?
Well, I'm guessing that guy had also been reading some of these crazy Facebook sites,
Yeah, I'm sure there is. And it's like what's coming in on those frequencies, right? Mm-hmm. It's like these are not experts or scientists or people who have some degree of credentials behind their names. But now, if you want to deal in statistics and other types of information, especially as it relates to black people, we have been heavily represented in the death and the long-term effects of this COVID virus.
You're right.
We do know that much.
Overrepresented, right? Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. If we have the knowledge of that, which can be researched out, then what is our course of recourse as to how to remedy that? Now, I would suggest, John, for black professionals, especially in the medical profession, and those who are even history majors, who have the knowledge, not a little knowledge, but a lot of knowledge of how to interpret our history and how to deal with those of us who are inclined towards being influenced by a little knowledge that locks us into a certain mindset to which you cannot reason with. Mm-hmm. And I heard your frustration with him, and I'll share this and I'll go. Now, I did hear on C-SPAN another brother by the name of Kenyatta, who was arguing against the masks, equating them with the burqas of our brothers from the Islamic world. And it's like the absurdity of some of these arguments, right? And the obstinance of it and the selfish and self-centeredness of it.
Yep.
Take a step back, you guys. You know, especially from all of this YouTube and all this other nonsense that's coming over these channels that we are inclined towards lending our complete trust into. Come on. Let's reason together.
Amen.
Okay?
Amen.
But thanks. I just had to get that off, man.
You did a great, David.
I thank you for the time.
My pleasure to give you the forum anytime. Look forward to hearing from you another time. We'll be back. I want to get into some global warming stuff, too, here. Professor Box, Jason Box, is going to be with us on the other side of this break. He's been working up in the Arctic for, I think, decades, for quite some time anyway. And he's featured in a couple of the documentaries that Leo DiCaprio and I put together. And I really want to hear what he has to say. It's on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, "The fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted, and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program today. Dr. Jason Box is on the line with us, professional physical climatologist. He's been studying the Arctic since 1994 with the Danish Geological Survey for the last 8 years, supporting numerous climate monitoring activities. His Twitter handle is climate_ice. I've been following him for quite some time. And Dr. Box, it's great to have you back on the program. It's been a while. I'm wondering what your latest research on the Arctic shows tells us about what's going on with climate change around the world and how it's changing the weather patterns of our planet.
Yeah, I'm part of the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, AMAP, part of their climate expert group, and we are responsible for reviewing all of the observational records of climate of the past. What is measured? That's what we do. We focus on observations, measurements, not so much the models. And so the past 50 years, we're finding with an increasingly precise story of just how the Arctic climate is unraveling. It is the leading edge of global climate change because the Arctic is warming 3 times as fast as the rest of the world. And that is directly changing the weather patterns where most people live in the mid-latitudes. These heat domes and what the Pacific Northwest experienced, that omega pattern, that is a super wavy jet stream. The cold wave that hit Texas recently, another example of a jet stream wave or polar vortex. It's the same thing, way out of proportion and persistently stuck in positions that make drought. They can make flooding. They make cold waves. Remember, the eastern U.S. was in cold, and in D.C. they're like, "Where's the global warming?" Whereas at the same time, the west coast of the U.S. was in drought and heat wave. This wave disruption is a signature of Arctic climate change.
Now,
and so there's lots of details. Yeah.
Go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Well, just back to the observational records, we do these 2-year updates. We've, like I said, more precise. What's really standing out is winter warming, and that is activating the permafrost carbon. The Arctic used to be a region of permafrost sink, of carbon sink. For tens of thousands of years, the Arctic soils are accumulating biomass and in a frozen state. And this warming, which is pronounced in winters, is activating microbial activity. It's thawing ground ice. The ice, it takes energy to heat ice, and it does nothing until it reaches 0 Celsius. And then it crosses that threshold, and you get melt, you get water ponding at the surface, which becomes a methane source to the atmosphere. Recent science that we're reviewing, observational studies demonstrate that the Arctic has become a source of carbon to the atmosphere, a warming-triggered source of carbon.
It used to be a sink. Now, okay, 2 big points here. With regard to the wavy jet stream, my understanding is that when the Arctic was frozen and very, very cold up there, that basically acted like kind of a dam to hold the jet stream as this giant river of air that flows in the upper atmosphere, just circulating around the northern part of North America and the rest of the northern hemisphere in a relatively smooth fashion. And that as the Arctic has warmed up, the jet stream has stopped being this one continuous river and has started just kind of drooling all the way down to Texas and back up again, and in the process trapping heat domes and cold air masses and things like that. And that's why Texas got hit. That's why when I lived in D.C. we got hit. In fact, I think you and I talked about that on the air. And it's why, and I live in Portland now. It was 116 degrees here a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be 100 degrees this weekend. That's because the jet stream is basically falling apart. I realize I'm not using scientific terminology, but do I have all that right?
Yeah, you've got that right. You can simply count the number of waves in the polar vortex, in the jet stream. And wave number 0 is a perfectly annular river with no waves. Then you get wave numbers that they're in, I think, in odd numbers. They go up, and so high wave number events are attributable directly to the Arctic heating at a faster rate. That's reducing the temperature difference that the strength of the jet stream normally depends on. But because the temperature difference, the Arctic should be colder, but it's warming faster than the rest of the world, which of course is also warming. That temperature differential relaxes. The jet stream gets into a drunken, wavy, stuck pattern, and then it can stick. The Russian heat wave of 2010 that drove global food commodity price spikes, the Pakistani floods of 2010, the August 2003 European heat wave that killed 75,000 people that weren't prepared for suddenly 5 sigma, off the charts warm anomaly. Those, we've gotten these little tastes of it, and it's kind of hard to imagine it getting worse, but it's probably going to get worse.
Well, and back when you and I first met, Leo DiCaprio and I were putting together this series of short videos with Lila Connor's Green World Rising. Yeah. And they live over on YouTube. People can just easily search for them. And one of the things that we were concerned about was the idea that the Arctic could move from being a carbon sink to being a carbon source, and that if that source got into a runaway mode, that it could produce such extreme weather that it could even conceivably lead to a mass extinction event. Many people would argue that we are living in a mass extinction event, but I mean one far more serious. Sometimes this is referred to as the clathrate gun, the deep frozen methane crystals in the sea. Now, there's been we got a lot of pushback for that, and people like Michael Mann, who's a regular on this program, climate scientist, saying, we're not anywhere close to that kind of disaster scenario. I mean, wiping out major chunks of life on Earth disaster scenario. But how far away do you think we are? Or is that something that is, you're in the Arctic, you're looking at this stuff. What do you think?
So this catastrophe is in slow motion, and we are like the frogs in a heated pot. We're just not barely noticing this, and the amount of carbon that's in the permafrost exceeds the amount of biomass carbon in all of the forests of the world by a factor of 3. Wow. There's 1,000 gigatons of carbon in the Arctic permafrost. That is 2.5 times the volume of carbon that's in our atmosphere. There is now growing evidence that warming is shifting the Arctic from, again, sink into source. There are abrupt processes that are wildfire, thermokarst, lake collapse of permafrost. These are the fire and the collapse mechanisms are not in the climate models, and they're being programmed in there now. But we are looking at a future of 15 Celsius warming in the Arctic by end of century, and 25 Celsius in winter. And those projections don't have these abrupt processes in them. So the path that we're on is most definitely a catastrophic path. How soon does the world become unlivable? I think we're approaching that right when these wake-up calls, like the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. that was 120 Fahrenheit, shattering records. Canada, that's basically unlivable.
Yes.
at least for nature, the forests are just at the point where they light up, and so this mass extinction event that we've entered, there's no real prospects, at least in the short term, that we're going to get out of it. We have to prepare for extreme disruptions to our lives, but I don't think anyone knows, just how soon the House of, or I don't know, House of Cards, is it a House of Cards, the civilization, how soon it falls apart. I think we are resilient, right? When you put this species under threat, it acts very well to preserve its own future. But that won't come without a tremendous amount of suffering, especially for poor people who lack the resources to mitigate, or they lack that resilience.
Yeah. So you're still hopeful that we can, if there is a concerted effort around the world to stop releasing carbon into the atmosphere, that we might be able to, at the very least, slow down this freight train. We have about 30 seconds, by the way.
Well, I like the analogy of applying brakes. So we're slowing down, and so the crash becomes less hard. Mm-hmm. We have to get busy removing carbon from the atmosphere. And do that at scale efficiently. And so halting carbon emissions and removing 1,000 gigatons or 500 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere is the project of the century. And, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Right, we need to get about it, yeah. Dr. Jason Box, climate_ice on Twitter is probably the easiest way to follow him. Dr. Box, it is great talking with you. Kind of bad news, but it's great talking with you. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and for coming on our program.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Tough times, huh? We got some serious work ahead of us. And, well, I'll rant about that in just a minute. And welcome back. Let's see here. Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm an everlasting cynic, but as far as the infrastructure, I believe that Republicans are playing rope-a-dope, patty cake, smoke and mirrors, and they're never going to sign on to it.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's just a stalling tactic. And our only real savior, in my opinion, is the filibuster. We got to bust you got to break that down. And because this is our only chance when we have a little bit of power. If we don't take it and use it, then we're going to lose it. And I just don't see the Democrats playing strong. We're always bringing a knife to a gunfight, and it's kind of discouraging. I want them to get tough, and I just think that's the only solution.
I share your sentiment, Steve, and it's so sad. It's so unfortunate. I mean, the reality of the situation is that back in the 1980s, when Reagan changed our economic system, and in many ways Reagan and the Supreme Court changed our political system, that there was a pretty substantial number of Democrats who thought, okay, we live in a new world, and so the kind of Clinton neoliberal consensus. And bringing in, giant funders and billionaires and hooking up with big corporations to support Democrats and the Democratic Party. And it has been a disaster. And we still have, the remnants of that, the tailing of that, attached to the Democratic Party, specifically in the case of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, among others. And
it's not working for the common person in America anymore.
Yeah,
it's being taken over.
And it's not working for the common good of our country either. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I don't know what to do, but I just that's my suggestion. I wish get the ear of these Democrats to just step up. But,
yeah, I'm with you. And we need to be leaning on them, and we need to be talking to them. Steve, thank you for the call. Elaine in Missouri. Hey, Elaine, what's on your mind today?
Greg Locke, the evangelical preacher in Tennessee, was just a splash in the news yesterday or day before. But he has told everyone in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, which is a suburb of Nashville, that if they wear a mask, they will be turned away this Sunday. And I think a whole bunch of people ought to show up at that church. It's in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. And I don't do Twitter or TikTok, but I wish a bunch of people that do would organize and have they need to have wall-to-wall people in that church this Sunday wearing masks.
I'm guessing he doesn't object to people wearing clothes. It's not like, if people were to show up naked, is that what he wants? No mask, no clothes. This is silly. The mask keeps you safe, and it keeps the people around you safe.
Yeah, I would love to see that crowd in that church this Sunday.
Yeah.
But other than that, the subject you just got to, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
The subject you just got to about global warming, I joined the, back then in 1970, they called it the ecology movement. Mm-hmm. And I've been in it ever since, and the first 10 years wasn't too bad.
Elaine, I'm sorry, I have to run. We're out of time, but thank you. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we have over at HartmannReport.com my daily rant, which you can find there. And over at ThomHartmann.com, we have the free newsletter, which lists every single website, gives you hot links right out to every single website for every single story that I talk about throughout the program during the course of the day. And then, of course, also at ThomHartmann.com, we've got our weekly video that we put up. And the one this week is kind of mind-boggling. It turns out, if you remember back when Anthony Kennedy resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court right after Trump made remarks about his son Justin, who had signed off on $1 billion worth of loans from Deutsche Bank to Donald Trump, Kennedy resigned, and Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump, and Christine Blasey Ford said he was, essentially guilty of sexual assault. All kinds of tips went to the FBI, and we have just found out what happened to those tips. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So 1,400 scientists warn of untold suffering. 14,000, excuse me. Thank you, Sean. 14,000 scientists warn of untold suffering if we fail to act on climate change. A.J. Dellinger writing over at Mike.com. There are some phrases that should stop you in your tracks. The warning of a future that holds, quote, untold suffering is one of them. This is 14,000 scientists from 153 countries who published this, who signed off on this paper that was, the lead work on it was done right here in Oregon. It was done at Oregon State University. 31 different planetary variables that they put into the formula, including surface temperature levels, rainforest health, glacial ice levels, fossil fuel subsidies. The one good piece of news is that fossil fuel subsidies are down to about $140 billion a year. Instead of $600 billion a year, which is the number I always quote. That number's a couple years old. But everything else is going to hell in a handbasket. It's getting worse very, very rapidly. Excuse me, the current subsidies are $181 billion a year. It's a 42% decline from last year. And renewable energy sources like wind and solar are now cheaper globally than coal. Literally all over the world, cheaper than coal. But this is what is so tragic about juxtaposing the third hour of our show today with the first hour of our show. In the first hour, I was talking about how Kyrsten Sinema, at the behest, no doubt, in my opinion, but I think that time will prove me right. Kyrsten Sinema, at the behest of fossil fuel billionaires, is saying no to a $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that would reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, that would give us a green infrastructure. Nobody's using the word Green New Deal, but that's basically what it was. And so you juxtapose that with Dr. Jason Box coming on in the third hour and saying, the Arctic is melting, and if it continues to melt, we're screwed, with a capital S. I mean, we are, and not just you and me. And that even right now, given how far we've already gone, we have to start as a nation and as a world planning for how we're going to deal. I mean, here in Oregon, we're going to have to start planning for how we're going to deal with it regularly going over 100 degrees in the summer. Because it was 116 degrees here in Portland a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be in the high 90s today. It's going to be over 100 degrees tomorrow. And at the same time, you've got Texas freezing. And this is all because this jet stream has just gone nuts. It's gone, like he said, these drunken waves. And that's because the Arctic is melting. We've got to do something about this. And these fossil fuel billionaires funding people like Kyrsten Sinema is a curse on our country.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your phone calls on anything we've been talking about today on the other side of this break. Stick around.
Our book for the book report today. Is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times, article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Wolff told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the civil rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench. And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and picking up your phone calls. And Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. One of the things that our billionaires are giving us, they're basically erasing the history of the world. As the polar caps and the glaciers and the trees burn, that's actually the knowledge that was locked into those items. That was the knowledge that gave us enough knowledge to know that climate change was actually taking place, because we can look back in history by looking at the layers of ice, looking at tree rings, and find out just what was happening in this world long before we were born.
You're absolutely right.
That is it's melting away it's like they're taking an erasing history of the world.
Yeah, you've got, I think, 600,000 years of ice in Iceland. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I don't think so. That they've been able to track back through, and you're right, it's melting. It is. That's such a good point, Larry. Thank you for calling and making that. Ben in Chicago. Hey, Ben, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm going back to Kenyatta, the first Kenyatta. He's got some valid concerns. Me as an African American male, there were some horrific things done to black people, absolutely. But as you said to him, this is not that. I was leery of the warp speed situation. I've had a gun pointed at my head from a police officer, and I'm one of your most upstanding citizens there is. But again, this is not that. We've got to learn to pull some common sense into this thing. When they do those vaccines, they're not saying, whoa, here comes somebody of color. I've got to go to a back room and grab a different vaccine. They're pulling from the same area, and people of all different colors are getting the same vaccine.
Right.
So I understand the concerns. Absolutely. But at the same time, we've got to realize when this is that and when this is not that. So, I just wanted to voice that. And also, the second thing I want to thank you for is you put out that Congress number several times on your program. And you're one of the reasons, actually, you are the reason that I've gotten involved and started contacting my congressperson on a regular basis.
That's great.
So I thank you for that. And I encourage everybody, anyone who's listening, to do the same.
And that phone number, this is to the switchboard at the Capitol building, and they can transfer you to the office of any senator or any member of the House of Representatives. That phone number is 202-224-3121. And Ben, thank you. Thanks for the acknowledgement, and thank you for your thoughts on the vaccine. You are so right, and you said it so well. Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day, Tom.
Thank you. You too. Jenny in Rockville, Maryland. Hey, Jenny, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm trying to stay hopeful. I'm hoping to be able to find a way, to step up with an opportunity. Well, I've got an opportunity for everyone, and it's also a way to kind of stick it to Joe Manchin as well. I called in a few weeks ago about the pharmaceuticals factory that is closing in West Virginia that nobody's doing anything about, including Joe Manchin, including their governor. It's set to close on Saturday, but it affects all of us, because I remember whenever the pandemic began, you were concerned, and so many of us were concerned, are we going to be able to get our medications because of the supply chain? And Joe Biden ran saying that he was going to shore up our domestic pharmaceutical supply chain. They did it. They used the DPA for an antibiotics plant in Tennessee. They can do it for this plant in West Virginia, which is going to lose 1,400 jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars lost for the area, an area that's already in such dire straits. And this story picked up no national attention until last week, when Laura Flanders wrote for The Nation and also did her show there, interviewing a lot of the activists and workers. And as well, Vanity Fair had an article by Catherine Iban, who's written about the FDA problems with certification we've had with offshoring generics manufacturing to India and China. So if it does affect all of us, so if everyone could call the switchboard and tell them that, we want to stand up. We don't want another sacrifice zone being created with deindustrialization and things offshore just so that corporations can make profits. In this case, it's Joe Manchin's daughter, who made millions of dollars. No doubt she has stock options whenever she helped sell off this company to Upjohn, which is a division of Pfizer. How much is enough? They're going to make so much money on the vaccine. Why do this? Why try to stop competition for a generics manufacturer when it benefits all of us?
Yeah, and my understanding is that his Joe Manchin's daughter, I think her name is Heather Bresch, if I'm remembering right.
That's correct.
Walked away with $21 million from that deal, or at least that's what I.
Yes, more like a $30 million golden parachute when she retired at 50. And if you read the articles that I mentioned, she came in like a cartoon supervillain, eliminating Christmas bonuses, no more Thanksgiving turkeys, just cutting things down and becoming extremely antagonistic with the union.
Yeah.
And this would be a great way to help West Virginia, which is in such terrible shape. They have a foster care crisis because of the opioid epidemic. Their governor is a coal baron who's done nothing to help this situation and to save these jobs.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jenny. And to your question of, how much is enough? When does the greed stop? Thank you for the putting that in my head. Let me share Ted Kennedy with you, asking essentially the same question of essentially the same, conservatives in Congress. Here he is. I think the button is not working. Oh, no. Yeah, my buttons are not working. Oh, well. Jenny, I got to move along. Thank you very much for the call. It's good to hear from you. David in Possum Lake, Texas. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Normally, I'm no friend of Jeff Bezos. I think he's despicable and his businesses are run in a horrible way and so on. Nobody deserves to have that kind of money. But I have to defend him on one thing. You said earlier that space flight is horribly polluting, which is true of every space program except Jeff Bezos. And he's actually burning hydrogen and puts out water vapor.
Yeah, that rocket ship was not. Are you telling me that rocket ship that he blasted off into space was 100% hydrogen?
Absolutely.
I'm gonna have to fact check that, David. I'll take your word for it for the moment. I would be shocked if that was the case. I mean, hydrogen is very explosive. That would be fascinating if that's true. But let's hold that thought until tomorrow. AJ in Tampa, Florida. Hey, AJ, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Hey, I was curious because I know you keep up with a lot of this stuff. Dan Crenshaw just put out a tweet earlier talking about that the mask mandate that the CDC has put out there now is from a busted study in India that evidently failed a peer review, and I was curious if you had seen that, what your position on that was.
I have not, but the deal with the masks, and AJ, I'm gonna drop you just because you got so much road noise in the background, but I can just riff on this very, very briefly. The reason why when a surgeon does surgery on you in the hospital, the surgeon is wearing a mask is because it used to be, before they wore masks, that they would cut you open and they would breathe on you, and their breath, all of our breaths, when we exhale, as I'm speaking right now, there's air coming out of my mouth, and that air is filled with little water particles, little tiny droplets of water and particles of dead skin from inside my mouth and all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of junk that comes out with that. And if I had a viral infection, there would be viruses in there as well. But the viruses would not just be all by themselves. They would be attached to the water particles by and large. So while it's true, one of the statements that many of the right-wingers have been making, in fact, I think it was made on Fox News a couple nights ago, is if you can smell smoke through a mask, you can get a virus through a mask. Sure, the smoke particles can get through the mask and you can smell them. The virus particles can get through the mask. But the deal is that if I'm the one who's infected and I'm talking and you're in my space, I'm blowing out lots and lots of this stuff. If I put a mask on, probably 70, 80, 90%, a large chunk of it, if it's a KN95 mask, 95% of those particles will be stopped. So I'm going to, instead of having a giant cloud of infection in front of my face and within, 6, 8, 10 feet of me, there's going to be a really tiny cloud of infection. And so then if you have a mask on, even if that mask is only stopping 1 out of every 2 or 3 particles that pass through it, you're going to, that smaller cloud of infection becomes an even tinier cloud of infection when it gets to you, perhaps one that your immune system can overcome. And so this goes back to the notion that we wear masks to protect ourselves, yes, but also, and arguably more importantly, to protect other people in case we have an infection and don't even know it. And this is the real problem that we have now with this Delta variant, is that people who have been vaccinated can get a breakthrough infection and not even know it. Because if you've been vaccinated and you get infected with COVID, at the worst, you get symptoms like a cold or the flu that just last a couple of days. The problem is, though, with the old COVID, the original COVID, it's amazing we're talking about old COVID. It's been a year and a half. But with the old COVID, if you were vaccinated, and even if you got a breakthrough infection, the number of viruses coming out of you would be very, very small. But the Delta variant, uniquely, while it prevents the damage to the lungs, so you don't die and end up in the hospital and intubated and all that, the vaccine does not prevent the Delta variant from infecting your nose and mouth. And so you will lose your smell, but more importantly, all those viruses that come out of you are at the same level of intensity as from a person who has never been vaccinated and who's laying in the hospital dying. And that's why we all need to be wearing masks, just in case any of us are contagious, to protect the people around us who didn't get vaccinated, or more importantly, the people around us who can't get vaccinated because they have an autoimmune disorder or the vaccines just don't work on them, or people who are over 65. They're talking about now a third dose. They're doing that in Israel. They started this week because your immune system doesn't take it up as well.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So that's why we wear masks. You wouldn't want a surgeon operating on you without a mask. It's just simple science. And welcome back. Dustin, hang on just a second. Click the button right. Dustin in Eagle Bend, Minnesota. Hey, Dustin, what's on your mind today?
Well, one of my questions was answered, but I'm going to just repeat it anyways because I can't think of anything else. The top CEOs like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Home Depot, Walmart, are they paying their fair share of taxes for... Well, for like climate change for mainly, but if that's...
Well, the attempts to mitigate climate change, the stuff that we're trying to do to reduce climate change is being funded, or at least the proposal to do that is being funded through tax revenue, and that's income taxes. And so Bezos, in some years was paying nothing in income taxes, apparently. I mean, you go back to the study done by, was it the Commonwealth, or it was one of those foundations anyway. They've been a guest on our program. But it seems like he had roughly the equivalent of around a 3% income tax that he was paying. So no, he's not kicking in his fair share, and that's all the more the tragedy. So that's what it is. Thank you very much for the call, Bob in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just speaking of Kristen Sinema. She wrote into her political career on the so-called Green Party, which I've always thought was just a farce, and it was a way to disrupt our elections and votes. If she was ever a part of that so-called party and to stand in the way of this bill that's going to do more to protect our environment, it just shows what a phony party that is. It's never been anything more than, I don't know if it's from the fossil fuel billionaires or Putin, that's trying to get their fingers into our political.
Well, and the Saudis and the Emiratis, they're all making a fortune on oil, and they're all active in this American political space. So yeah.
And she's a phony. She's just a phony, or she would be standing tall with this policy that's going to do more to help our planet and our climate than anything we've done in forever.
Yeah, and I think that's why her approval ratings among Democrats in Arizona is now below 30%. She's going to have a hell of a hard time getting reelected in 2024, which tells me that she may have, a multi-million-dollar a year job lined up, or now, the Supreme Court has reinterpreted the whole thing about political PACs, and so now you can raise, and this is what Trump has done. He raised hundreds of millions of dollars and moved it into these leadership PACs, into these super PACs, and now he's living off it. Right now. In fact, he's raised $75 million so far this year. And his PAC is just coming right out and saying, yes, we're giving this money to Donald Trump for meals, for lawyers, for living expenses. It's like, and so, she may be sitting on, she could leave office in 2024 with $5, $10, $15 million in her election campaign, move it into a leadership PAC, and then live off that for the rest of her life. I mean, this
Absolutely.
is, it's like this.
Yeah, here in North Carolina, we had a quarterback from Washington and Tennessee. One term, he was a phony Democrat, and when he was asked on his way out, says, "I'll be making millions of dollars as raising money for the party."
Yeah,
he was.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't
Sure.
be. We used to have laws against this. In fact, we passed a whole bunch of them after the Nixon bribery scandals, in 74 and 75, and then the Supreme Court struck them down in 76, which was just so wrong, and Citizens United, basically. Bob, thank you for the call. Spot on. It's 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter is extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mike in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Hey, listen, I just wanted to tell you you just mentioned that over, I think you said Israel, they're testing the third shot.
They're passing
of the
out starting this week. Maybe the announcement was this week and they start next week, but they're definitely doing the third shot in Israel.
The trials for at least for Pfizer on the third shot has started already here in the U.S. I got a call last Friday and was being asked if I would consider participating in the third shot trial here in the U.S., and I gladly accepted. I was a part of the original Pfizer trial for the vaccine in the first place. As a matter of fact, it's coming up to about a year now where I got my first shot, and to maybe help Kenyatta out a little bit, no ill effects whatsoever at any point.
Yeah, same here. Same here. And by the way, Mike, if I can just jump in here, I mentioned earlier this piece in Nature.com today, brand new article. In fact, it was in my Nature newsletter this morning. I got an email. The title is "A Blood Marker Predicts Who Gets Breakthrough COVID." And what they found is that people fully vaccinated against COVID are less likely to become infected with the coronavirus, that's a breakthrough virus, if they have relatively high levels of virus-blocking antibodies. This was a study that was done on 11,500 fully vaccinated healthcare workers at Sheba Medical Center near Tel Aviv. And the study, I mean, they weren't all in that hospital, but healthcare workers around the world, but they did the study out of the hospital. And what they found was that the healthcare workers who got the breakthrough infections, who were fully vaccinated but still got COVID, even though they didn't get real sick, they didn't die, they in many cases didn't even have symptoms. The one thing that they found in common among all of them was that they had low levels of antibodies. In other words, when they got the shot, their body didn't produce a lot of antibodies, and that's why they're doing the third shot. And what they find is that the older a person is, the fewer antibodies you produce because your immune system is just not quite as hyperactive as when you're younger. And for people who are on drugs that diminish the immune system, these drugs to deal with things like plaque psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis, the autoimmune disorders, and there's a whole bunch of other autoimmune disorders out there. Those drugs reduce your response, and so you'll have fewer antibodies, so you're more vulnerable to a breakthrough infection. So those would be the folks who would be, at the top of the list to get this third shot, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and I just want to add one more thing to Kenyatta as well, and just as a black man as well, I felt it necessary to participate in the trials because I knew for a fact that there was going to be some hesitancy on the part of African Americans based on our history with the medical and scientific community.
Right.
So I wanted to get the vaccine, and I wanted to be a spokesman for that whole scenario, and that's also why I readily, accepted the opportunity to become a part of the third shot.
That's great. Well, Mike, let us know how it works out, okay?
I will do. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. Never was, never will be. In fact, when it becomes a spectator sport, it's no longer a democracy. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow with Anything Goes Friday, and Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be with us for an hour for a National Progressive Town Hall meeting. It's going to be a great day. So be good to yourself and the people around you. If I didn't say tag, you're it, and have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We take life back!